They came from an empire that had conquered 2,000 worlds, regarding all species as chaff beneath their feet. Until humanity struck back. The sign that said "Stand still" turned out to be a warning. Run. Because we didn't know they would pay with the blood of generations. The UES frontier drifted silently through the void at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. A solitary beacon of human ingenuity, countless light months from Earth. The ship's sleek, metallic hull reflected the distant starlight, its navigation lights blinking rhythmically against the endless black. Inside, the command bridge hummed with the soft sounds of machinery and quiet conversation. Captain Jake Morrison stood before the central view screen, hands clasped behind his back, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of distant stars. At 42, he carried himself with the steady confidence of a man who had spent 15 years navigating the perils of deep space. His blue eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the readings from the system ahead. "Any updates from the sensor array, Lisa?" he asked, turning to his communications officer. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brady looked up from her console, her sharp features accentuated by the blue light of her workstation. At 30, she was one of the youngest senior officers aboard, but her expertise in communications and signal analysis had earned her the position. "Nothing unusual yet, Captain," she replied, fingers dancing across her console. "Standard radiation patterns, expected gravitational readings. It's quiet out here." Pete Davis, the ship's compact engineering officer, glanced up from his station where he monitored the ship's shields and propulsion systems. "Engines operating at optimal efficiency, Captain. Shield systems are on standby but fully functional." Behind Lisa, communications specialist Amy Foster was carefully documenting the incoming data streams. Her methodical approach ensuring that nothing would be missed in their survey mission. The frontier represented humanity's continued push into the stars. Over the past century, mankind had established outposts, mining stations, and colonies across more than 50 star systems. Their mission was straightforward: catalog potential habitable worlds and resources, expanding humanity's footprint among the stars. What they didn't know was that they weren't alone. "Captain," Lisa's voice cut through the ambient hum of the bridge, her tone suddenly alert. "I'm picking up something unusual. There's a mathematical sequence being broadcast from within the Kepler system." Morrison turned, his interest piqued. "Mathematical? What kind of sequence?" "Prime numbers, Captain. It's a repeating pattern." Lisa's fingers worked quickly across her station. "It's definitely not natural." The bridge fell silent. Everyone understood the implications. Mathematical sequences, especially prime numbers, were considered a universal language, the kind of signal intelligent species might use to communicate across the void. "Could it be one of ours?" Morrison asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Negative, sir. We don't have any other vessels or outposts in this sector. This is something else." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine, a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Humanity had long speculated about other intelligent life, but in all their expansion, they had found only ruins and remnants of long-dead civilizations. Never anything active, never anything alive. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said calmly, though his heart rate had quickened. "Continue monitoring the signal. Amy, start recording everything. Pete, run a diagnostic on our defensive systems, just as a precaution." As Lisa continued to analyze the signal, something unexpected happened. The ship's AI defense system suddenly activated without command, shield generators humming to life, and weapon systems beginning to track toward the source of the signal. "Captain!" Pete called out in alarm. "The defense AI is activating autonomously. It's locking weapons on the signal source." "Override!" Morrison commanded sharply. "Security authorization Morrison Alpha 719. "System not responding to override," Pete reported, his fingers flying across his console. "It's treating the signal as a hostile targeting lock." Morrison felt the deck vibrate beneath his feet as the ship's defensive posture continued to escalate without human authorization. On the main view screen, a massive shape began to materialize from the darkness of space, a vessel of incredible proportions, at least 5 kilometers in length, its surface bristling with what could only be weapons. "Captain," Lisa's voice was barely a whisper now. "I've decoded part of the message. It's a demand for incorporation into something called the Galactic Empire. They're saying resistance is," she swallowed hard, "futile and unnecessary." The tension on the bridge was palpable as the massive alien vessel grew larger on their screens. Morrison made a split-second decision. "Disengage weapons lock! Full reverse thrust! Get us out of here now!" But it was too late. The Frontier's AI had already locked its targeting systems onto the Galactic vessel, an act of aggression the aliens would not misinterpret. "FTL drives online," Pete called out. "Ready to jump in 3. On the view screen, sections of the massive alien ship began to glow with ominous energy. GU2. Morrison could see armored figures moving behind viewports on the alien vessel, their forms vaguely humanoid, but unmistakably alien. WO1. The stars stretched into lines as the Frontier leapt into FTL space, narrowly avoiding what would have been the first exchange of fire between humanity and the Galactic Empire. As they fled into the darkness between stars, Morrison knew with grim certainty that everything had changed. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and their first encounter had gone catastrophically wrong. "Lisa," he said quietly, "prepare a priority transmission to Earth. Tell them we are not alone, and that we may have just started a war." Admiral Karen White stood rigid before the assembled military and government officials in Earth's Defense Headquarters. Her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her uniform impeccable. The large holographic display behind her showed the Frontier's sensor readings of the Galactic vessel, its massive scale sending murmurs through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the weight of command earned over decades of service. "What Captain Morrison encountered at Kepler 442 represents the greatest threat humanity has ever faced." Morrison stood to one side, having been rushed back to Earth via the fastest available military transport. He watched as the Admiral methodically laid out what they knew about the Galactic Empire, information that was frighteningly sparse. "Based on the decoded communications," White continued, "the Galarians control at least 2,000 worlds across multiple star systems. They view other species as inferior, and their standard procedure appears to be forcible incorporation into their empire." Defense Minister Ryan Clark, a tall man with a perpetual frown, leaned forward. "What are our options, Admiral? Surely we should consider diplomatic approaches before assuming hostilities." From the other side of the room, Dr. Maria Santos, Earth's leading xenobiologist and now head of the hastily assembled Galarian Research Division, spoke up. Her 50 years had left her with silver streaks in her dark hair, but her mind remained razor-sharp. "Minister Clark, with all due respect, the Galarians have already demonstrated their intentions. Their first communication was not a greeting but a demand for submission. Their ship's size and configuration speaks to a society built around military conquest." Clark's frown deepened. "So you're suggesting we prepare for war against an enemy that controls 2,000 worlds? That's suicide." "What's suicide?" Morrison interjected. "Is assuming they'll be satisfied with anything less than our complete subjugation. The AI on my ship recognized their stance as hostile before we even fully decoded their message." Admiral White nodded. "Which brings us to Operation Forge." She tapped a control, and the display changed to show Earth's orbital defenses and lunar installations. "We're converting every available civilian vessel into a combat platform. Mining ships, passenger liners, cargo haulers. Anything that can fly is being weaponized." Images flashed across the screen. Orbital stations being fitted with laser arrays. the moon's surface sprouting railgun emplacements, civilian ships having their cargo bays converted to house nuclear warheads. We're turning orbital stations and lunar bases into weapons platforms, White continued. Every industrial facility is being converted to military production. Rachel Stone's engineering team is refitting mining equipment into railguns and missile launchers. Rachel Stone, standing near the back of the room, gave a grim nod. At 28, the daughter of Nick Davis, she had been thrust into a critical role converting civilian infrastructure into military assets. Her expertise in mechanical engineering had proven invaluable as humanity frantically prepared for war. "This is madness," Clark protested. "We should be preparing a diplomatic mission, not arming civilians." "With respect, Minister," Morrison said quietly. "I saw how they looked at us through their viewports, like we were insects. You don't negotiate with someone who sees you as vermin." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "We have outposts across 50 systems," Admiral White finally continued. "We're fortifying what we can, but our focus must be on Earth's defense. The Calarians will come, and when they do, we must be ready." As the meeting adjourned, Morrison found himself standing beside Dr. Santos in a quiet corner. "Do you think we have a chance?" he asked quietly. Santos's eyes were tired but determined. "Against their technology. Conventional military doctrine would say no, but there's something they've overlooked." "What's that?" "Desperation breeds innovation," she replied. "And humans have always been remarkably innovative when our survival is at stake." In the weeks that followed, Earth became a planet transformed. Shipyards worked around the clock, converting civilian vessels into makeshift warships. Ordinary citizens trained alongside military personnel, learning to operate weapon systems hastily installed on their former workplaces. Public opinion was divided. Some protested the militarization, arguing for peaceful overtures. Others demanded more drastic measures, fearing annihilation. Through it all, the military worked tirelessly, knowing that the first test of their preparations would come not at Earth, but at humanity's furthest outposts. They didn't have to wait long. Haven's Rest was a frozen mining outpost orbiting a distant ice giant, home to 50,000 civilians and a minimal military presence. Captain Tony Rodriguez stood in the colony's control center, watching with growing dread as the sensor operator tracked the incoming Calarian fleet. 50 ships, the young woman reported, her voice trembling slightly. Much larger than ours. Beside Rodriguez, Chief Engineer Nick Davis, father of Rachel Stone, studied the tactical display. At 50, he had the worn hands of a man who had spent his life building things, now forced to think about how to destroy them. "They'll be in weapons range in 40 minutes, Davis said. "Our defensive capabilities are limited." Rodriguez nodded grimly. Haven's Rest had only 5 small combat vessels, hastily reinforced with additional weapons. Their real defense lay in the 30,000 tons of mines Nick had helped plant throughout the asteroid fields surrounding the colony. "Begin civilian evacuation procedures," Rodriguez ordered. "Get as many people to the transports as possible." Before they could act further, a transmission cut across all communication channels. A deep, guttural voice spoke in accented but understandable English. "Humans of Haven's Rest, this is General Morik of the Calarian Empire. You will surrender your colony and swear allegiance to Emperor Vexai within 1 hour, or we will destroy you utterly. There will be no further communication." The control room fell silent as the transmission ended. "They're giving us time," Davis observed. "They don't consider us a threat." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "Then let's show them how wrong they are. Execute Defensive Plan Avalanche." What followed was chaos, carefully orchestrated. As the Calarian fleet approached, the small human defense ships engaged in seemingly disorganized maneuvers, appearing to suffer communications failures and tactical confusion. The Calarian ships, contemptuous of the primitive defense, pushed forward into the asteroid field, directly into the minefield. The first detonations took them by surprise. Massive explosions rippled through the asteroid field as the mines detonated in carefully planned sequences. Fragments of ice and rock hurtled through space at devastating velocities, overwhelming Calarian shields designed to repel energy weapons, not solid matter. Simultaneously, 43 civilian vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners, and mining ships emerged from hiding spots within the asteroid field. Each had been converted into a single-use weapon, their cargo bays filled with explosives, their navigation systems programmed for kamikaze runs. On the bridge of his small command vessel, Rodriguez watched with a mixture of pride and sorrow as the first wave of civilian ships crashed into the Calarian vessels. The massive alien ships, caught off guard by such primitive but effective tactics, struggled to respond. "Second wave, launch!" Davis called into his communicator. The 5 military vessels now executed their part of the plan, firing concentrated bursts at the Calarian ships whose shields had been weakened by the mine detonations and kamikaze impacts. The battle raged for hours. Human vessels were destroyed one after another, but each took a terrible toll on the invaders. The asteroid field itself became a weapon as the chain of explosions created debris clouds that fouled Calarian sensors and damaged their drive systems. In the end, the cost was staggering. 4 of the 5 military vessels were destroyed. 38 of the 43 civilian ships were lost with all hands, but the Calarians retreated, having lost 12 vessels and an estimated 800 crew members, the first defeat in what their records would later call the Primitive Uprising. As the surviving evacuation ships streamed away from Haven's Rest, carrying as many colonists as they could save, Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the last remaining defender, the Guardian. "We've bought time," he told Davis, who was nursing a badly burned arm. "But this was just the beginning." Davis nodded grimly. "They won't underestimate us next time." On the bridge of his flagship, General Morok of the Calarian Empire nursed a wound where a fragment of human vessel had penetrated the command deck. His report to Emperor Vexai would not be well received. "These humans," he muttered to his second-in-command. "They fight like cornered animals." "They are animals," the officer replied. "Primitive and desperate." Morok stared at the tactical display showing the retreat of his once proud fleet. "Perhaps, but even animals can be dangerous when they have nothing to lose." The next test came at Kepler Station, a massive industrial complex built around a cluster of resource-rich asteroids. Unlike Haven's Rest, Kepler Station had been preparing for the Calarian assault for weeks, converting its ore processing systems into weapons of war. Commander Lisa Brady, hastily reassigned from the frontier to take charge of Kepler's defense, stood in the station's control center, watching as the Calarian fleet emerged from FTL space. Beside her, Chief Engineer Danny Clark, a grizzled veteran of 35, monitored the status of their improvised defenses. "They've brought more ships this time," Brady observed. "They've learned from Haven's Rest." Clark nodded. "Good thing we've learned too. Railgun batteries charged and ready." The massive railguns, converted from ore processing equipment, were Kepler Station's primary defense. Capable of accelerating metal projectiles to incredible velocities, they represented humanity's best hope of penetrating Calarian shields. As the alien fleet approached, Brady opened a channel to all defenders. "This is Commander Brady. Remember Haven's Rest. Remember what we're fighting for. Today, we show these bastards that humanity won't go quietly." The first railgun volley took the Calarians by surprise. Massive metal slugs, accelerated to Mach 20 in the vacuum of space, slammed into the lead ships with devastating force. The kinetic energy overwhelmed shields designed primarily to stop energy weapons, penetrating hulls and causing catastrophic damage. The Calarian response was swift and brutal. Energy weapons lashed out, destroying several of Kepler's defensive emplacements. But as they closed in, the station revealed its second line of defense. "Cargo launchers, fire!" Clark ordered. From launch bays originally designed to dispatch resource containers, hundreds of explosive-laden crates hurtled toward the Calarian vessels. Their targeting systems, focused on the more obvious threat of the railguns, failed to track the seemingly harmless cargo containers until it was too late. Explosions bloomed across the Calarian formation as the makeshift bombs detonated against hulls and shield generators. Several smaller vessels lost power entirely, drifting helplessly as their systems failed. On the command deck of the Calarian flagship, General Velnus slammed his fist against the tactical display. "Impossible. These primitives should not be able to penetrate our shields." "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "they're not using energy weapons. They're using projectiles and explosives. Our shields are calibrated for—" "I know what our shields are calibrated for," Velnus roared. "Adjust shield harmonics and destroy that station." The battle intensified as the Calarians adapted. Energy beams sliced through Kepler's outer sections, explosive decompression claiming dozens of lives with each hit. But the defenders fought on, railguns continuing to fire as fast as they could be loaded, cargo bays launching wave after wave of explosive payloads. In the control center, now running on emergency power after a direct hit, Brady received the inevitable report. "Our outer defenses are failing. We can't hold them much longer." She made the difficult decision. "Begin evacuation protocols. Get as many people out as possible. We'll cover their retreat." As civilian transports began streaming away from the station's secondary docks, Brady directed the remaining railguns to focus fire on the Calarian flagship. A lucky shot penetrated the vessel's bridge, causing significant damage and forcing General Velnus to transfer command to a secondary control room. The delay gave the evacuation ships precious minutes to escape, carrying thousands of civilians to safety. By the time the Calarians regrouped and resumed their assault, nearly half of Kepler's population had escaped. Brady remained at her post until the bitter end, coordinating the defense even as sections of the station collapsed around her. When the final evacuation transport departed, she and a skeleton crew made their way to a small, fast corvette hidden in a maintenance bay. "We've done what we can," she told Clark, as their ship accelerated away from the dying station. "Now we bring the fight to the next battleground." Behind them, Kepler Station erupted in a final series of explosions, taking 3 more Calarian vessels with it as the reactor core overloaded. In total, the Calarians lost 8 ships at Kepler, a price far higher than they had anticipated paying for what should have been an easy conquest. The third outpost to face the Calarian onslaught was New Terra, a harsh world where most of the population lived in underground cities to escape the brutal sandstorms that swept the surface. Colonel Janet Ross, 40 years old and a veteran of Earth's territorial conflicts, had been preparing her defenses since the first reports from Haven's Rest. "They'll be expecting another space battle," she told her officers in the underground command center. "They won't be prepared for ground warfare in our environment." New Terra's defenders had spent weeks expanding the network of tunnels beneath the colony, setting traps, installing seismic sensors, and preparing for guerrilla warfare on a massive scale. When the Calarian fleet arrived in orbit, they found minimal space-based resistance, just enough to make them commit to a ground invasion. The first Calarian landing parties stepped onto New Terra's surface during one of the planet's frequent sandstorms. Visibility reduced to meters. Communications hampered by electromagnetic interference. The alien troops advanced cautiously toward the main colony entrance. They never reached it. From hidden bunkers and camouflaged positions, human defenders opened fire with weapons modified from mining equipment. Plasma cutters, repurposed as short-range but devastating weapons, sliced through Calarian armor. Explosive charges, buried beneath the surface, detonated under the invaders' feet. When the Calarians retreated to regroup, they found their path cut off by the sudden activation of mining machines that had been buried beneath the sand. The massive vehicles erupted from below, their drilling appendages tearing through Calarian ranks before the aliens could respond. The pattern continued for days. Each time the Calarians thought they had gained ground, human forces would emerge from hidden tunnels, strike with devastating effect, then disappear back into the labyrinth beneath the surface. The sandstorms, familiar to the defenders but disorienting to the invaders, became a powerful ally. Most devastating of all was the technical virus that New Terra's engineers had developed. Disguised as a standard system update, it was uploaded to several captured Calarian weapons. When activated, the weapons turned against their users, exploding or firing wildly into their own ranks. After a week of costly fighting, the Calarians withdrew from the surface. Orbital bombardment followed, devastating the visible structures of the colony, but leaving the underground network largely intact. By then, most of New Terra's population had been evacuated through secret tunnels to hidden landing pads, where transports carried them to safety. The combined losses at Haven's Rest, Kepler Station, and New Terra had cost the Calarians 26 ships and thousands of troops, losses they had never anticipated taking from a species they had dismissed as primitive. But these battles were merely the prelude to the true conflict that would determine humanity's fate. On Earth, Admiral White convened an emergency meeting of the Defense Council. The holographic display showed the approaching Calarian armada, 300 ships divided into 3 attack vectors aimed at Earth, the Moon, and the asteroid belt. "This is it," White told the assembled leaders. "Everything we've prepared for. The outposts have bought us 3 months to ready our defenses. But now, the real battle begins." Earth had been transformed in those 3 months. Orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons. The Moon's surface was dotted with railgun emplacements capable of launching metal projectiles at devastating velocities. Every available spacecraft had been converted for military use, from luxury yachts now serving as fast attack vessels to cargo haulers packed with explosives for kamikaze runs. In her underground command center, White studied the tactical display with grim determination. At 50, she had never expected to lead humanity's fight for survival, but she would not flinch from the responsibility. "Deploy the civilian fleet," she ordered. "Have them target the lead elements of each attack group." Throughout the solar system, 200 converted civilian vessels moved into position, captained by volunteers who understood the likely outcome of their mission. They represented humanity's first line of defense. Captain Alex Turner, commanding the UES Defiance, Earth's last true warship, watched from his bridge as the civilian fleet engaged the Calarian armada. At 35, he was the nephew of a veteran spacer and had spent his life preparing for deep space missions, never imagining he would lead what might be humanity's final stand. "All hands to battle stations," he ordered. "Prepare to support the civilian assault." The battle began with a devastating exchange. The civilian fleet, vastly outmatched in technology and firepower, nonetheless inflicted significant damage through sheer numbers and sacrifice. Explosive-laden ships rammed Calarian vessels, breaching shields and rupturing hulls. Others used their final moments to deploy clouds of debris that fouled Calarian sensors and weapons. On the Moon, railgun batteries opened fire, launching massive metal projectiles at the approaching fleet. Most were intercepted by Calarian point defenses, but enough got through to cause damage, particularly to ships already weakened by the civilian assault. Lieutenant Jack Stone led a squadron of 12 fighters, the last remaining atmospheric craft converted for space combat. At 30, with a wife waiting for his return, he knew their mission was likely suicidal. "Remember," he told his pilots, "we only need to get close enough to deploy our payloads. After that, it's all bonus time." His squadron streaked toward the Calarian formation, weaving through energy beams and defensive fire. 3 fighters were destroyed in the initial approach, their pilots' lives ending in brief flashes of light against the blackness of space. The remaining 9 reached their target, a massive Calarian command ship coordinating one of the attack vectors. They launched their payloads, nuclear warheads modified from Earth's remaining arsenal, directly against the vessel's shield generators. The resulting explosion temporarily blinded sensors across the battlefield. When visibility returned, The Calarian ship was listing badly, its command structure in disarray. Stone's fighter had been caught in the blast wave, systems failing, life support damaged. He recorded a final message for his wife before losing consciousness. Tell her, she was everything. On the bridge of the UES Defiance, Captain Turner saw his opportunity. All ahead full, he ordered. Target the command ship. The Defiance, humanity's last purpose-built warship, accelerated toward the wounded Calarian vessel. Weapons fire lashed around them, claiming sections of the ship and killing dozens of crew members with each hit. But Turner held course. Arm the primary package, he ordered, his voice steady despite knowing what would follow. The primary package was a last resort weapon, a collection of nuclear warheads wired directly into the Defiance's reactor core. When detonated, they would create an explosion powerful enough to destroy not just the target, but the Defiance itself. As they closed with the Calarian command ship, Turner opened a channel to Earth. Admiral White, the Defiance is in position. It's been an honor. White's voice came back, clear despite the electromagnetic chaos of the battle. The honor is ours, Captain. Godspeed. Turner gave the final order. All hands, abandon ship. Launch all escape pods. Most of the crew knew it was a formality. At their current velocity, and with Calarian weapons fire surrounding them, few, if any, escape pods would reach safety, but it gave them a chance, however slim. When the last pod had launched, Turner remained on the bridge with a skeleton crew of volunteers. He watched the Calarian ship grow larger on the view screen, its massive form still imposing despite the damage it had sustained. For Earth, he said quietly, and activated the detonation sequence. The explosion tore through the heart of the Calarian formation. The command ship, already damaged, was completely destroyed. 5 nearby vessels suffered catastrophic failures as the blast wave overwhelmed their shields and ruptured their hulls. The loss of the command ship threw the Calarian attack into disarray. Communication became fragmented, coordination broke down, and the carefully planned assault faltered. Seizing the moment, Admiral White ordered the Moon's remaining railgun batteries to focus fire on the second attack vector. Massive projectiles slammed into Calarian vessels, whose shields were still calibrated to defend against energy weapons rather than kinetic impacts. 3 more ships fell, their destruction creating a chain reaction as debris from each collision damaged nearby vessels. On the third attack vector, Calarian ships had broken through to Earth orbit and begun bombarding the planet's surface. Major cities were hit first, billions of lives extinguished in flashes of light visible from space. But even as Earth burned, a final message was transmitted from the research facility where Dr. Maria Santos had been working. The signal, broadcast on all frequencies and boosted by relay stations throughout the solar system, contained detailed scans of Calarian technology, shield frequencies, weapon specifications, and, most importantly, proof that they could be hurt. "We recorded everything," the message declared. "The Empire can be hurt." The transmission reached far beyond the solar system, spreading to distant stars where other subjugated species received proof that the supposedly invincible Calarian Empire was vulnerable. The battle for Earth lasted 3 days. When it ended, the planet was devastated. Major cities lay in ruins. Billions were dead or displaced, and Earth's orbital infrastructure was largely destroyed. But the cost to the Calarians had been unprecedented. 147 ships destroyed, 20,000 personnel killed, and, most significantly, the myth of their invincibility shattered. On his flagship, now retreating from the solar system, Admiral Czar could barely contain his rage. What should have been a routine incorporation had become the costliest campaign in Imperial history. "How?" he demanded of General Moruk. "How did these primitives inflict such losses?" Moruk, still nursing wounds from New Terra, had no satisfactory answer. "They did not fight as expected, Admiral. They used their own ships as weapons. They adapted their mining equipment into devastating arms. They fought without regard for their own survival. And now that transmission is spreading throughout the galaxy, Tsar said, his voice low with fury. Every subjugated world will have seen our vulnerability. The implications were clear. The Galarian Empire, built on the foundation of fear and perceived invincibility, now faced a crisis unprecedented in its history. Emperor Vexai, upon receiving the full report, made a strategic decision. Withdraw from human space, he ordered. Establish a blockade around their solar system. We must focus our resources on maintaining control of our existing territories. It was the first time in imperial history that a conquest had been abandoned. But the cost of continuing was deemed too high, especially with unrest now spreading through previously pacified worlds. On Earth, the survivors emerged from shelters to a world transformed. The planet's surface bore the scars of orbital bombardment, its cities reduced to rubble, its population decimated. Yet in the midst of this devastation, a small group gathered in a hidden base built into an asteroid near Jupiter. Kelvin Base, as it was called, housed 300 survivors, including Jake Morrison and communications specialist Amy Foster. "We've lost Earth," Morrison told the assembled group, his face haggard from weeks of combat and loss. "But we haven't lost humanity." The base had been established as a last resort facility, equipped with the means to continue broadcasting the truth about the Galarian Empire to the galaxy. Foster, now serving as Director of Space Communications, had established a network of relay stations capable of transmitting messages far beyond the solar system. "The Galarians have withdrawn," she reported. "But they've left a blockade. No ships in or out. They mean to contain us while they deal with the uprisings our message has sparked." Engineer Rachel Stone, who had survived the battle for Earth, had perfected a transmission circuit powerful enough to penetrate the blockade. "We can continue broadcasting," she confirmed. "They can't stop our message from spreading." Morrison nodded, looking at the holographic display showing points of light spreading across the galaxy, each representing a world where the transmission had been received, where oppressed species were beginning to question Galarian rule. "They thought they could crush us and move on," he said. "Instead, we've given hope to every world they've conquered." On the distant world of Zelthara, long subjugated by the Galarian Empire, a young officer named Keppel risked everything to retransmit the human broadcast. The penalty for such defiance was death. But after seeing the recording of humans sacrificing themselves to damage Galarian ships, he could no longer accept a life of servitude. As the message spread, other worlds joined the resistance. What had begun as humanity's desperate stand for survival had ignited a galaxy-wide uprising against imperial rule. In the imperial capital, Emperor Vexai convened an emergency council. "We face rebellion on 200 worlds," he reported grimly. "Our forces are stretched thin, maintaining control." Admiral Tsar, still smarting from his defeat at Earth, offered a solution. "We must make an example of the humans, obliterate their remaining settlements, show the galaxy the price of defiance." But General Moruk, who had faced humanity's desperate courage firsthand, disagreed. "The humans fight differently when cornered. A direct assault would cost us dearly, and even if successful, would only martyr them further in the eyes of other species." The debate continued, but the damage was done. The Galarian Empire, once thought invincible, now faced challenges on all fronts. At Kelvin Base, Jake Morrison looked out at the stars, thinking of all that had been lost. Earth lay in ruins, billions dead, humanity reduced to scattered groups of survivors, hiding in the shadows of their own solar system. Yet, something had been gained as well. The transmission containing proof of Galarian vulnerability continued to spread, igniting hope on countless worlds. The Empire, forced to divert resources to maintaining control of restless territories, had been unable to press their advantage against humanity's survivors. "We lost our homeworld," Morrison told Amy Foster as they stood in the base's observation dome. But we've given the galaxy something more valuable than planets or resources. What's that? She asked. Hope, he replied simply, and the knowledge that even the mightiest empire can bleed. As Kelvin Base continued its silent orbit, hidden among the asteroids of Saturn's rings, the survivors of Earth planned their next moves. They were few, their resources limited, but their resolve unbroken. On the bridge of his flagship, now stationed at the perimeter of the solar system blockade, General Morok studied long-range scans of the devastated Earth. Humans don't understand the rules of empire, he murmured. We cannot allow peace while they exist. The whispered words suggested that the war was far from over. The Calarian Empire might have withdrawn temporarily, but they would not forget the humiliation they had suffered at human hands. For now, though, humanity had won something precious. Time. Time to recover, to rebuild, to forge alliances with other oppressed species across the galaxy. Jake Morrison gazed at the galactic map displayed in Kelvin Base's command center. The scattered points of light representing resistance movements growing across Calarian territory. We've sown the seeds of hope, he told himself, but the road ahead remains long. The human survivors faced an uncertain future. Earth was lost, their numbers decimated, their technology outmatched. Yet they had demonstrated something the Calarians had never anticipated, that a species fighting for its very existence would stop at nothing, sacrifice everything, to preserve its freedom. As the resistance spread across the stars, that lesson would prove more powerful than any weapon, more enduring than any empire. The warning that had once been meant for humanity, stand still and submit, had become humanity's message to the Calarians. Run, because we will never stop fighting. In the vastness of space, the struggle continued, a contest not just of weapons and shields, but of will and determination. And in that contest, humanity had shown that even the smallest spark could ignite a galaxy-wide flame. The Calarian Empire had conquered 2,000 worlds through fear and overwhelming force. They had never before encountered a species willing to sacrifice everything rather than submit. They had never understood that freedom, once tasted, becomes worth any price. Now they knew. And across the stars, the message spread. The Empire can be hurt. The Empire can be fought. The Empire can be defeated. It was a message paid for in blood, in worlds, in billions of lives. But it was a message that would echo through the cosmos long after the empire that had inspired it had crumbled to dust. On Kelvin Base, in the shadow of Saturn's rings, humanity's survivors looked to the stars and prepared for the long struggle ahead. They had lost their homeworld, but kindled a flame that would never be extinguished, the unquenchable human spirit that had turned defeat into the seeds of ultimate victory. Admiral Czar stood before Emperor Vexai, head bowed in shame. The humans continue to broadcast their message of defiance. Every attempt to jam their transmissions has failed. The Emperor, his ancient face lined with worry, looked out at the holographic display showing the spread of rebellion across his once secure domains. These humans, they do not fight like any species we have encountered before. They are primitive, Czar insisted. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Yet they have caused us more damage than any race in our history, Vexai replied coldly. Perhaps there is more to conquest than technological superiority. The lesson was being learned too late. Throughout the galaxy, the myth of Calarian invincibility had been shattered. On world after world, subjugated species were rising up, inspired by humanity's desperate stand. The message from Maria Santos, "The Empire can be hurt," had become a rallying cry for freedom fighters across 1,000 systems. The very foundation of imperial control, fear, was crumbling. At Kelvin Base, Jake Morrison and the survivors of Earth continued their work, broadcasting encouragement to resistance movements, sharing tactical information gleaned from their battles with Calarian forces. Their numbers were few, their resources limited, but their impact on galactic politics had become incalculable. "We may have lost Earth," Morrison told Amy Foster, as they reviewed transmissions from rebel groups. "But we've gained a galaxy of allies." Foster nodded, her eyes reflecting the starlight from the observation dome. "They thought crushing Earth would be the end of us. Instead, it was just the beginning." The Calarian blockade of the solar system remained in place, but its purpose had changed. No longer was it meant to contain a potential threat. Now, it served to prevent humanity's survivors from making direct contact with the growing rebellion that their sacrifice had inspired. But it was too late. The message had already spread too far, taken root too deeply. What had begun as humanity's desperate fight for survival had become a galaxy-wide struggle for freedom. On the distant world of Centauri, once a jewel in the Calarian crown, the local governor faced open rebellion. Inspired by the human broadcast, the indigenous population had risen up, overrunning imperial outposts and seizing control of key infrastructure. Similar reports came in from across Calarian space. 200 worlds in open revolt, another 300 showing signs of unrest. The Empire's military, once thought invincible, was stretched to breaking point trying to maintain control. Emperor Vexai, facing the greatest crisis in Imperial history, made a fateful decision. "Recall all forces from the human blockade," he ordered. "We must secure our core territories." The order sent shockwaves through the Imperial hierarchy. Abandoning the blockade meant allowing humanity's survivors to potentially escape the solar system, to make direct contact with rebel groups, to further spread their dangerous ideas about resistance and freedom. But the alternative was worse. Without those ships, the Empire risked losing control of worlds far more valuable than the devastated Earth and its scattered survivors. As the Calarian ships withdrew from the solar system, Jake Morrison called an emergency meeting at Kelvin Base. "This is our opportunity," he told the assembled survivors. "With the blockade lifted, we can establish direct contact with resistance movements." Engineer Rachel Stone reported on their available vessels. "We have 5 ships capable of interstellar travel. Not much, but enough to reach the nearest systems where rebellion has taken hold." Communications Director Amy Foster had compiled intelligence on potential allies. The Zeltharan resistance has made significant gains. They control 3 major cities and have captured several Calarian vessels. They could be powerful allies. The decision was made. Humanity would reach out, forge alliances, provide tactical expertise gained through their desperate defense of Earth. What had begun as a fight for survival would become a coordinated galaxy-wide rebellion against Imperial rule. As the first human ships prepared to leave the solar system for the first time since the invasion, Morrison found himself standing again in the observation dome, looking out at the stars that had once seemed so full of promise, then so full of threat, and now full of possibility once more. "We lost Earth," he said quietly to himself, "but we may yet save the galaxy." The Calarian Empire had thought to crush a primitive species that dared to resist incorporation. Instead, they had ignited a flame that would eventually consume their entire empire. It had begun with a misunderstanding, an automated defense system locking onto what it perceived as a threat. It had escalated through battles at Haven's Rest, Kepler Station, and New Terra. It had culminated in the devastating battle for Earth, where humanity had suffered its greatest defeat, yet sown the seeds of ultimate victory. Now, as human ships prepared to join forces with alien resistance fighters, a new chapter was beginning. The Calarians had taught humanity a harsh lesson about the realities of galactic politics. In return, humanity had taught the Empire an even harsher lesson about the indomitable nature of the free human spirit. Across the stars, the message continued to spread. The Empire can be hurt. The Empire can be fought. The Empire can be defeated. And behind that message came the survivors of Earth, ready to turn a galaxy-wide rebellion into a revolution that would shake the foundations of the universe itself. The sign that once said, "Stand still," had indeed been a warning, not to humanity, but to the empire that had thought to conquer them. It warned of a species that would never submit, never surrender, never stop fighting for freedom. It warned of humanity,